High above an ancient world, something is moving through the air. Not a bird. Its wings stretch wider than a small airplane. It stands as tall as a giraffe, and it is looking down at the ground for something to kill. For over a century, we have asked a simple question: what is the largest creature that ever flew? Ask most people, and they will give you one name: Quetzalcoatlus, the airplane-sized reptile, the poster child of prehistoric flight. But that answer has three problems. The first, it wasn't a dinosaur. The second, it may not actually be the biggest. And the third, the real answer isn't a single name at all. Because the largest thing that ever flew turns out to be three different creatures, wearing three different crowns. To understand why, we have to climb, from the giants of the insect world, through monstrous birds with wings the length of a bus, all the way up to flying reptiles so massive that, by the rules of modern physics, they should never have left the ground. This is a countdown, and it starts somewhere that sounds impossible. A predator the size of a hawk, with 6 legs. "300 million years ago, long before the dinosaurs, the world was covered in forest, and the air belonged to the insects. Most insects today are small. There is a reason for that: a hard physical ceiling on how large they can grow. But for a brief window in Earth's history, that ceiling lifted. Meet Meganeuropsis. It looked like a dragonfly. It hunted like one too, snatching other insects out of the air mid-flight. But its wingspan reached 70 centimeters, over 2 feet, wider than a crow. The largest insect known to have ever flown. So how was this possible? The answer is in the air itself. Insects do not have lungs. They breathe through tiny passive tubes that thread oxygen directly into their bodies. It is a system with a built-in limit. The bigger the insect, the harder it is for oxygen to reach the center of its body. But 300 million years ago, the atmosphere was different. Oxygen levels were far higher than they are today, perhaps 30% of the air, compared to 21% now. Richer air meant those tiny breathing tubes could supply a much larger body. So the insects grew. And then, as oxygen levels fell, the giants vanished permanently. Meganeuropsis is the ceiling of what breathing through tubes can build. To go any bigger, you need bones. And once nature started building flight out of bone, things got out of control. Move forward. Far forward. Past the age of dinosaurs entirely. The asteroid has come and gone. The giants are dead. And the survivors, small, feathered, warm-blooded, are inheriting an empty sky. These are the birds. And the question becomes, how large can a bird get and still fly? Look at the ocean today and you'll see the answer most people expect. The wandering albatross, a magnificent glider with a wingspan around 3.5 meters. It is the largest wingspan of any living bird, now nearly double it. Meet Pelagornis sandersi. Its wingspan reached over 6 meters, more than 20 feet tip to tip. Almost certainly the largest flying bird that ever lived. And it had one more detail that makes it unforgettable. Teeth. Not true teeth, but sharp, bony spikes lining the entire length of its beak. A jaw built like a serrated trap, perfect for seizing slippery fish and squid from the surface of the sea. But an animal this wide had a problem. It was almost certainly too large to take off the way smaller birds do. by flapping hard from a standstill. Instead, Pelagornis is thought to have been a master of the wind, launching from cliffs or slopes, locking its enormous wings open, and riding the invisible gradients of ocean wind for hours, barely flapping at all, like a living glider crossing entire seas. Pelagornis holds a crown, the widest wingspan of any bird that ever lived. But wingspan is not the same as size, because there is another bird, not as wide, that was far, far heavier. And it was a predator. 6 million years ago, in the open skies above ancient Argentina, something enormous was circling. Meet Argentavis magnificens, a teratorn, a distant relative of modern condors and vultures, scaled up into a monster. Its wingspan reached roughly 6 meters, rivaling Pelagornis. But where Pelagornis was a lightweight glider built for the sea, Argentavis was built like a tank. It weighed around 70 kilograms. To put that in perspective, that is heavier than many adult humans. It is roughly 5 times the weight of the largest flying birds alive today. This is, almost certainly, the heaviest bird that ever took to the air. And here we hit a wall in the physics of flight. An animal that heavy simply cannot flap its way into the sky. The muscle power required would be impossible. So how did it fly? The same way a glider pilot stays aloft. Argentavis is believed to have relied almost entirely on rising columns of warm air, thermals, and on the wind sweeping up mountain slopes. It likely launched by running downhill into a headwind, the way a hang glider does. And once airborne, it could soar for enormous distances, hunting and scavenging across the landscape, barely spending any energy at all. So now we have 2 crowns: Pelagornis, the widest bird; Argentavis, the heaviest bird. And you would think between them we'd found our answer. But every bird on this list, every single one, is dwarfed by what came before them. Because tens of millions of years earlier, the sky belonged to something that was not a bird at all. Go back, past the birds, past the asteroid, into the age of dinosaurs, and meet the rulers of that ancient sky, the pterosaurs. This is the detail almost everyone gets wrong. Pterosaurs were not dinosaurs. They were reptiles, but a completely separate branch of the family tree. They evolved flight entirely on their own, tens of millions of years before the first bird ever opened its wings. And they did something no bird has ever managed. They broke the size ceiling. To understand how, you have to understand how a pterosaur got off the ground, because it was nothing like a bird. A bird launches with 2 legs. It crouches and it leaps, using only its hind limbs to throw itself upward before the wings take over. A pterosaur used all 4. Folded up on the ground, a giant pterosaur walked on its wings, knuckling along on the same limbs that carried its flight membrane. And when it wanted to fly, it didn't just jump with its legs. It vaulted. In a fraction of a second, it slammed all 4 limbs against the ground and catapulted its entire body into the air, like a pole vaulter launching off both arms and both legs at once. This launch system changed everything. A bird is limited by the power of its hind legs alone. A pterosaur could call on the massive muscles of its arms and shoulders, the strongest part of its body. And that meant it could afford to be heavier, much, much heavier. So the only question left was, how far could nature push it? The answer takes us to 2 animals, both enormous, both contenders for the single largest creature that ever flew. Let's start with the one you already know, Quetzalcoatlus northropi. named after the feathered serpent god of the Aztecs, discovered in the deserts of Texas. The single most famous flying animal in all of prehistory. And its dimensions are staggering. A wingspan of 10 to 11 meters. Standing on the ground, folded up, it was as tall as a giraffe, looking a fully grown human dead in the eye, and then some. It did not spend its life over the ocean. Quetzalcoatlus is now thought to have been a stalker of dry land, striding across the landscape on all fours like a gigantic, grim stork, plucking up smaller animals that had nowhere left to run. But here is something the documentaries rarely tell you. When Quetzalcoatlus was first described, the early size estimates were even bigger. Some ran as high as 15, even 20 meters. Those numbers were wrong. As scientists restudied the crushed, fragmentary bones and corrected for the damage millions of years had done to them, the estimate came down and settled today at around 10 to 11 meters. For decades, this was the answer. The biggest thing that ever flew. And then, a set of bones came out of the ground in Transylvania. Bones that matched Quetzalcoatlus in wingspan and made it look fragile by comparison. In the late 1970s, in the Hatzeg region of what is now Romania, a team uncovered fragments of an animal so large, they first assumed they belonged to a predatory dinosaur. They were wrong. It was a pterosaur. It was named Hatzegopteryx, the Hatzeg Basin wing, and it changes the entire story. For a long time, people assumed Hatzegopteryx was simply bigger than Quetzalcoatlus, wider, taller, the new undisputed champion. But the honest, modern science says something more interesting. In wingspan, they were roughly tied, both around 10 to 11 meters. Hatzegopteryx was not wider. It was worse. Where Quetzalcoatlus was built like a stork, long, lean, almost delicate, Hatzegopteryx was built like a battering ram. Its skull alone reached up to 2.5 meters in length, one of the largest skulls of any animal that ever lived on land. And unlike its cousins, it did not have a long, slender, fragile neck. Its neck was short, thick, grotesquely muscular, built to withstand the violent forces of seizing and thrashing large prey. But this creates a paradox. A skull that size, a body that robust, that should be far too heavy to fly. So how did it? The answer is hidden inside its bones. Most pterosaurs had hollow, air-filled bones, light but fragile. Hatzegopteryx had something different. Its bones were filled with a dense, spongy internal structure, almost exactly like styrofoam. Strong enough to survive a fight with a dinosaur, light enough to still get off the ground. This was the apex predator of an entire lost world, Hatzeg Island, a landmass in the ancient European Sea, where the dinosaurs themselves had shrunk into dwarfed, isolated species. Hatzegopteryx ruled it completely. There was nothing on that island large enough to challenge it. So which one wins? Here, finally, is the honest answer. There is no single largest creature that ever flew. There are three. The widest wings ever grown by a bird, Pelagornis, over 6 meters of glider built for the open ocean. The heaviest bird ever to leave the ground, Argentavis, a 70-kilogram predator riding the mountain winds. And the largest flying animals of all time, the giant pterosaurs, Quetzalcoatlus and Hatzegopteryx, tied at the very top in wingspan. One built for striding the open plains, the other a battering ram that ruled a lost island. By wingspan, they share the crown. By sheer mass, by raw, monstrous build, Hatzegopteryx stands alone. And that ambiguity, that there is no clean, single answer, is not a failure of science. It is the most honest thing we can say. The largest thing that ever flew was not a dinosaur. And it was never just one animal. All of it, the giant pterosaurs, the lost islands, the rulers of the ancient air, ended in the same instant. 66 million years ago, the asteroid struck, and the giants of the sky fell with everything else. But here is the strangest part. That size was never reached again. In the 66 million years since, nothing that flies has come close to a Hatzegopteryx or a Quetzalcoatlus. The biggest birds that ever lived, Pelagornis, Argentavis, fall short of them. The ceiling the pterosaurs broke closed behind them, and it has stayed closed ever since. We live under a smaller sky than the dinosaurs did. Look up today, and the largest thing you will see on the wing is a bird with a wingspan of 3, maybe 3.5 meters. Once, the same patch of sky held an animal nearly 4 times as wide, a creature that walked on its wings, that vaulted into the air on all fours, that stood eye to eye with a giraffe and hunted dinosaurs. We are still arguing about exactly how big it got. We are still pulling its bones out of the ground. And every fragment we find asks the same quiet question the sky has been asking for 66 million years. How big was the biggest? And are we even close to knowing?